Hello all, welcome to another session in this course. As part of this session, I am going to cover the next topic, that is IIFE functions in JavaScript. So the topic here is IIFE functions in JavaScript. So what is the full form of this IIFE? Here I stands for immediately invoked function expression. Okay, immediately invoked function expression is a full form of this IIFE functions. Immediately invoked function expression functions. So what are these? These functions, unlike traditional functions, are self-invoked functions. We don't have to call these functions. These functions will call themselves. We don't have to specially call them. Okay. In order to generally traditional functions, for the code that is there inside the traditional functions, we need to call the functions with their name and all circular brackets and all we need to call. But here in this case of immediately invoked function expressions, functions, we don't have to call them because they will call themselves only. Let me practically demonstrate how this IIFE functions can call themselves. So let me go to this Visual Studio Code and just create a new IIFE.js, I'll say, and here let me create a function. This is a traditional function, guys. First I'm creating a traditional function. Later I'll convert the traditional function into a IIFE function. Okay. I'll say fun a, like this I'll create, and here inside this function I'll write console.log. Okay. I'll say hi. Okay. Now if I run this code, nothing will get executed. If I run this particular code, the function is not called. So the code that is there inside the function won't get executed. But if I call this function node space IIFE.js, if I run, you see, I'm not getting any output because I need to call this traditional functions fun a, like this function calling statement I need to write. I need to write this kind of function calling statement and run this statement. Then you see the code that is there inside the function will get executed. The code that is there inside the function will get executed if I do that. Now, I don't have to explicitly call the IIFE functions. I'll convert these traditional functions into the IIFE function like this. Okay. What you have to do is the same function, you keep it as it is and surround with circular bracket first. Surround this entire function with the circular bracket and remove this name of the function. There is no need to give the name because these are self invoked or self callable functions, right? They will be calling themselves. There is no need to give any name. Okay. And the earlier function without the name, I'm putting inside the circular brackets. Now here put a semicolon here, put a semicolon here, and before the semicolon, you provide circular bracket like this. Okay. If no parameters are there, you can provide the same circular brackets here. This part will call the function which is there inside the circular brackets. Okay. So I don't have to call this particular functions explicitly here. Okay. This block itself will call the function. Okay. These are IIFE functions, guys. You see, I'll clear it and see that I'm not calling this function, but here this particular thing, which is part of this IIFE function expression. Okay. IIFE function type. This part will call the function. Okay. This is self-invoked function. Node space IIFE.js. If I write, you see, I'm getting high. That means the code that is there inside the function is getting executed. Now let's go back. Let me remove this and create another function. Function add a comma b. I'll say there are two parameters in this case of traditional function here. There are two parameters in this one of the example add function of this. Okay, and here if I write console a plus b, if it is there like this. Okay, now if I run this code, the sum of this a and b will not be executed. Okay, so you just see here what will happen. Node space IIFE dot js. If I say the function will not get executed, guys, how to call the function? Add function calling statement. Since there are two parameters I need to pass, let's say 5 comma 4 I'll pass, and this time what will happen? This function will be called and 5 will go into a. This is a traditional function. Okay, 4 will go into b and 5 plus 4 9 will be printed. Okay, now run this code and see 9 got printed here. Okay, that's very good. Now I'll convert this traditional function into a self-closing function. I mean, IIFE function, I self-calling function, that is IIFE function. For that, I need to remove this function name. Okay, first thing is that you have to remove the function name and surround this function without the name inside the circular brackets. This is the next step. And now you need to put a semicolon here. Before the semicolon, you just have to copy this part and paste it here. That's it. That's it, guys. You don't have to, this function doesn't have any name, and this is what is self-closing function. Even though you don't call it explicitly from a separate line, this block itself will call itself. You see, this part will call this function, and 5 will go into A here, 4 will go into B here, and A plus B will happen. Okay. So this is what will happen, guys. Now run this and see. You see, we got the 9 printed. Okay. So this is what is a self IIFE function, guys. This is what exactly is a IIFE function. And you can also convert this this kind of style into arrow function kind of style also. Instead of this, you can also write like this. Okay, I'll just take a copy of this and write like this. I'll just say A. Okay, and then here I'll put an arrow mark, and console dot log, and semicolon I'll remove, and this curly brace I'll remove. You see, this is also fine. In a single line I can create this. Okay. So I converted this normal function into a arrow function inside this IIFE function. Okay. So this also will work in the same fashion. In a single line, this function will call itself, guys, and 5 will go into the A, and 4 will go into B, and A plus B, 9 will be printed. Just run this code and see, still 9 got printed. Okay. So these are the ways of using this, guys. And other properties about this IIFE function is that the scope is, okay, a new scope will be created, and the scope will be restricted to this particular function itself. So for that, let me, do one thing, function. Let me create something. Traditionally, we'll generally create a variable, guys, okay, where a is equal to 5 I created, and then here function b, like this I'll create, console.log, I'll say b. Okay, console dot log and say hi otherwise. Okay. So this is one variable and this is one function, and the scope of this variable and the scope of this function is throughout this file, throughout this JavaScript file. But I want to restrict this scope. I want to restrict this scope to a particular block. I don't. Okay. So if I write here console.log a, I can access. If I call this function like this, you see, the scope of this variable and function are throughout this JavaScript file, so I can access it anywhere. I can alter the value of this particular variable anyway. Okay, I can call this function anywhere in this particular file. Okay, if I just see here, if I run this code, you can see that I can access. Okay, if I got printed, and I got printed. This is not IIFA function. This is a traditional variable and traditional function whose scope is throughout the JavaScript file. So what I will do here is I'll put this particular variable and function inside this IIFE function. Okay, inside this IIFE function I would like to create. How to do that? First I have to put the circular bracket, and I need to end the circular bracket here. I will end the circular bracket here. Okay, and here I'll write down function like this, starting of the curly brace, and here I'll end the curly brace. Okay, like this I'll do, guys. Okay. What will happen if I do something like this? This is the IIF function, and here I need to self call this function, right? I'll just self call this function using the circular brackets, and so here there's a function. Inside the function there is a variable, and let me write like this here. Okay, like this I'll write. Okay, so now this particular variable and function scope is up to this particular function only. You cannot access this variable and function outside the this IIFE function. Okay, if you want to restrict the scope of this variable and function outside, from outside the, you don't want to access this particular variable and function outside this particular function, what we can do here is, okay, function where a is equal to 5, function b is equal to console.log hi, and now what I need to do here, guys, I need to, I'll do one thing. I'll just need to try to access this variable. Okay, is it possible or not? Let's see. Okay, I can call this self call this function. Hi will be printed. That's okay. Okay, so can I access this variable outside this function console.log? If I say a here, you cannot access this variable, guys. You cannot access. If you don't want this to be called, you can do like this for a while. And let's run this code. And here write down node space IIFE.js. you see error will come. You cannot access this variable a because the scope of this variable a is up to this IIFE function only. Within the function only you can access. Outside you cannot access. Okay, you can restrict the scope of this, but a new scope will be created up to this function only, and outside the function these are encapsulated otherwise. Okay, with inside this function. Within the function you can access, but outside the function you cannot access. Now if I self call this function, okay, and if here I'll print plus a here, that's okay, it will happen. Okay, hi if I will be printed now. The let's do one thing. Outside the function you cannot access, but within the function, what is the problem here? I need to call this function, guys. I need to call this function. So here only I'll call the function within this IIFE function only. I'll call the it's part of the function. Okay. So with this, things are going to work fine. You see, high five will be printed. So hope guys you understood about IIFE function in JavaScript. Okay. So we don't have to go too deep into this. Whatever I covered so far is more than enough, guys. So that's all for this session. Thank you. Bye bye.